we can complain all day about the billable hour model, the adversarial nature of our work, toxic law firm culture. And I'm not ignoring that those things can be factors, but too often, just as you said earlier, Gary, we focus on changing the outside circumstances rather than looking within, which is where our power actually is, because we can control very little about the job, but we can control our responses, where our boundaries are. We can increase our resilience, and we can learn to soothe our own nervous systems. And our so-called, negative emotions can be so powerful if we're just willing to sit with them and listen to them. They can show us where our needs aren't being met. They can show us where we've abandoned ourselves or what we might need to let go of. And so for most clients, their burnout is trying to show them those exact things. It's showing them where they're out of alignment with their true selves and their soul's purpose.
Welcome to the Free Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Gary Miles. The Free Lawyer Podcast is designed for the lawyer, entrepreneur, or professional who is in some way unfulfilled, stressed, or stuck, and is looking for something better. We will discuss various blocks that limit us from achieving the personal freedom that we all desire, but have not yet fully experienced. And we will give actionable steps to free yourself from them. Are you looking to achieve a new level of success? If so, this podcast is for you. Hey everybody, welcome to today's episode of The Free Lawyer. We have a powerful, unique, and really fascinating topic today. Happy to have with us Tracy Inscore. Tracy is an amazing lawyer in California who had some of her own struggles with burnout and has come up with become an expert in a very unique area that helps us to reduce and indeed prevent burnout. And Tracy's going to show us how we can practice law and not suffer the consequences of burnout quite as much. Tracy, how are you today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you so much, Gary.
I'm glad to have you. So Tracy, to share with me a little bit about your journey and how you transitioned from practicing land use law and environmental law in California to becoming a holistic energy practitioner and really learning how to help overcome burnout.
Sure. So it really started with my own experience with burnout and severe depression and anxiety, much like you shared about your own experience, Gary. So much of your story resonated with me. And I also had major imposter syndrome. And so even though I was outwardly thriving, on the inside, I was really struggling and miserable.
Such a common thing. So many of us feel the same way. We look so successful, but yet we don't feel that way.
Yeah, and you feel like such a fraud. Like if people only knew what was really going on with me. And so I coped with a combination of alcohol and over-exercising to escape and numb out, which only made things worse physically. And I thought, maybe this just isn't for me, but I don't want to throw away my law degree because I put so much time and effort and money into becoming a lawyer. So I tried leaving full-time law practice and going in-house. I was a law professor. I did editing work. I was even a fitness instructor for a while. I had like 5 or 6 part-time gigs going at the same time. So naturally, I burned out again. And I realized that law practice and the legal profession really weren't the problem. The problem was within me. And this really sparked.
I think that's such an important point that I want to highlight.
Yeah.
I just was coaching a client this morning and he was talking about all the stresses. And we have a lot of external stresses, our clients, our partners, the other lawyers, the court system, whatever it might be. But the real pressure we can manage is the ones we create in ourselves.
Exactly. It's the energy that we bring into any situation or whatever it is that we're doing. I thought having all these fun jobs, these things that sounded so much more fun than full-time law practice would be the magic ticket. And they weren't. And so
why weren't they? Because they do sound fun in relation to practicing law in a competitive firm.
Right? Because I really brought the same issues with me. My need to be in control, my people-pleasing tendencies, my inability to say no, my perfectionism. Like for example, if someone needed a class covered at the last minute, didn't matter if I had worked all day and it wasn't convenient for me, I'd say yes because I loved being needed. My ego thrived on being the go-to person.
So
So the recipe for
some people sometimes talk about the geographical cure. I'll move somewhere else away from these people that aren't good influences. But wherever we go, we take ourselves with us. And that was your experience. Whatever you're working in, you took yourself with those issues with you.
Exactly, exactly. And so, finally, it really sparked a spiritual awakening, for lack of a better term, that really led me to explore alternative and holistic wellness to fix those root cause issues within me. And, I still practice law part-time. And so I realized a huge unmet need among fellow lawyers for true deep healing. And that as a fellow lawyer who understands the unique challenges firsthand, because I don't want to minimize, yes, there are certain stresses and things
No doubt.
unique, yep, to the profession. I'm uniquely able to come alongside people and say, I get it. And I will teach you exactly what I'm doing, and we can make things better together.
So, what does holistic wellness mean?
So, really, it's about the mind body connection. It's treating the whole person and not just symptom management, which is so much what Western medicine has become about. And in our society, we just want to cover up and get a quick fix and manage the symptoms so we can go back to churning out work and billable hours. But we need to really go within and address the whole picture.
Yeah, I agree with what you just said, and also the analogy to Western medicine. A shout out for a book called Outlive, where he talks about his nightmare at the beginning of the book is he's a doctor and people are throwing eggs off the ceiling. He's running around trying to catch them before they hit the ground and prevent them from breaking. But the real goal of medicine should be to stop the person from throwing the eggs off the building. And it's all about how we can live life healthier to avoid a lot of the diabetes and other illnesses that Western medicine treats. And that's what you're saying. We want to treat the whole body so we handle some of these stresses better and don't suffer some of the symptoms of burnout that some of us do.
Exactly.
So tell me, Tracy, what do you do? How do you help lawyers to manage those stresses and avoid burnout?
So I became a certified emotional freedom techniques, EFT for short, or commonly known as tapping. I became a certified practitioner. And so I work with clients mostly in one-on-one sessions using this technique, which is an amazing somatic technique. Somatic meaning, in the body, which is so often the overlooked piece in healing and feeling better.
So I've had a call with you already, and you told me about that, and I sort of scratched my head, admitted my ignorance. What is EFT or tapping?
So EFT works with the meridian systems in the body, and it's based in the ancient Chinese practice of acupuncture, which most people are familiar with. So you're already halfway there. But instead of using needles, the founder of EFT, a man named Gary, also Gary, another Gary, Craig, found that you could achieve phenomenal results with emotional issues, and by extension, many physical issues as well by just doing light fingertip tapping on specific points in a specific sequence on the head and upper torso while you focus on a specific issue or memory or a problem. And
Do we focus on a negative issue or a memory or a positive one?
so we mostly want to focus on the negative. Because we actually want to clear that.
I see.
Um, mhm.
And and so for someone who's logical, intensely logical, does it work?
Yes. So I was extremely skeptical, and I'm embarrassed to say it took me 2 years to even try this after I heard about it. And I had tried really everything out there. For some reason, was reluctant to try this. It felt too easy, sounded too good to be true.
It does sound easy. You're right.
And as lawyers, we're used to things being hard. We are
Right.
used to having things, if it's not a ton of effort and a ton of hours, that can't possibly work. And I would say we're also so used to being in our heads, logical and analytical, and putting our clients' interests ahead of our own, that so many of us live in a constant state of mind-body disconnect. And we learn to suppress and disconnect from our own emotions so that we can be effective advocates and work through really stressful conditions. And a lot of the qualities and personality traits of lawyers that make us very effective and successful in our professional lives can actually hinder us when it comes to our own healing. Like, I remember the first time a therapist asked me where I felt a certain emotion in my body. And I just stared at her like, what do you mean? My emotions are in my brain. I'm in control of those. And it's so frustrating that so many of the self-care tools that lawyers are given and told they should be doing either aren't realistic or they're not really made for a lawyer's brain. Like, no one's going to meditate for an hour or go to yoga when they're in the middle of a trial or a stressful closing. So what I love about EFT is that once you learn the basic technique, you can use it on your own whenever you need to. You don't need a session. You can close your office door, go sit in your car, use this to immediately help take the edge off when you're stressed or you're really upset about something. It takes less than 10 minutes to do a quick few rounds, and it's a really active process. And we're able to measure the results right away because we use a 0 to 10 scale. So that really helps to satisfy the more results-oriented aspect of our personalities. And it allows us to be calm and yet still alert and focused. So I like to say it helps us take the edge off without losing our edge. Because when we calm the amygdala, and that's how EFT works, we have better access to our prefrontal cortex, which is the creative problem solving part of our brain. So it's like perfect technique for lawyers.
Wow. So a couple thoughts. I want to dive into some of that a little bit better. One of the things I've seen with lawyers is they do spend so much time focusing on their clients' needs and not enough focusing on their own. And you mentioned that, and you said it leads to a mind-body disconnect. What do you mean by a mind-body disconnect?
So really being in our head and disconnected from our heart. In some cases, that can be maybe ignoring actual physical cues like hunger and fatigue so that we can push through and meet a deadline. Maybe it's ignoring emotional discomfort when we have to argue or advocate for a position we don't agree with, or we have to deal with a really nasty opposing counsel. In some ways, that ability to shut down and turn off that kind of alarm system coming from our body can serve us very well professionally. Sometimes that's necessary. The problem is when that becomes so chronic and so habitual that that disconnect no longer allows us to be really fully integrated within our own body.
Right, right. And you mentioned immediate feedback and there being sort of a grading system. Explain that. What is graded or how does that work?
Sure. So I first direct when I'm working with a client, or if you're just tapping on your own, whatever your issue is, you want to be as specific as possible in identifying the exact thing you want to focus and focus on and target. And you would assign like a 0 to 10 score, 10 being, let's say, the highest, unbearable, just driving you out of your mind, 0 being not bothering you at all. It's a subjective unit of distress scale. Where are you? And then after the tapping, and maybe even throughout, you're checking in with yourself to see, all right, where has that number gone? Has it gone up and maybe pointed me towards another issue that's actually the real driving factor here? Or has it gone down? I remember the first time I tried it, I went from like an 8 to a 3, and I was just blown away at the change and how quickly I felt really just that emotional charge. I'm sure you've you've had this, Gary, where you recall something upsetting and you can viscerally feel it. You feel that emotional charge or that grip in your stomach, how that was just gone. I was able to just reframe and look at the whole situation in a different way. And this was within minutes. This wasn't within, hours and hours of therapy like I was so used to.
And have you found that with other lawyers you worked with? Have they reported to you that they've seen in the same way that some of those stresses have been, if not removed, at least significantly lessened by doing EFT?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That it not only helps with the acute stress in the moment as it comes up day to day. So EFT is a phenomenal tool for that, but also to work through some of the deeper underlying issues. And that by doing that, really increasing your resilience long term so that you can stay exactly where you are. Some people start out thinking, I need to leave the legal profession. That makes me so sad because we're
Me too.
losing a lot of creative, empathic, brilliant, kind people who we need to be in these positions of leadership and authority. And what's so great is they're able to actually stay put where they are and relate to their career, relate to everyone around them in a completely different way. And of course, people start responding to that differently. So
Why do you think EFT is particularly effective and helpful to lawyers who are struggling with being on the verge of burnout?
I think it goes back to what we were saying about so many lawyers are used to being logical and analytical and in our heads, and we actually tend to be a little bit overdeveloped in some of the cognitive strategies to deal with our stress and burnout. We're very good already at seeing different perspectives, at reframing, at delegating tasks, at doing all the things that we're told to do. But if the body never got the message that it's safe, because the body keeps the score, then we're going to find ourselves in those same reactive patterns over and over and over. And so EFT is really that missing piece that combines the cognitive, because you are voicing and talking about what's bothering you, with the somatic. And so we're engaging the nervous system, we're engaging the subconscious mind. And once we tap into those two things, it's like a fast track.
Mhm. What, you struggle with burnout during your career. What are some common misconceptions about burnout? And how does your approach challenge those misconceptions?
So the number one thing that I've learned about burnout is that it's never really about the job. It's a symptom of those much deeper issues. So what are these deeper issues we're talking about? It could be things like lack of alignment, because it's very draining to pretend to be someone you're not, or living in conflict with your core values and priorities, not being in alignment with your true gifts and purpose. It could be childhood family dynamics, past trauma, nervous system dysregulation, subconscious blocks, fears, limiting beliefs around money, maybe a belief we have to struggle and sacrifice in order to be worthy, that it's not allowed to be easy. And of course, we have a ton of societal programming and this hustle culture. And so this means that changing jobs or changing industries might give some temporary relief. But just like with me, that pattern of burnout will find a way to keep showing up in other areas of life till we address the real problem. And we can complain all day about the billable hour model, the adversarial nature of our work, toxic law firm culture. And I'm not ignoring that those things can be factors, but too often, just as you said earlier, Gary, we focus on changing the outside circumstances rather than looking within, which is where our power actually is, because we can control very little about the job, but we can control our responses, where our boundaries are. We can increase our resilience, and we can learn to soothe our own nervous systems. And our so-called, negative emotions can be so powerful if we're just willing to sit with them and listen to them. They can show us where our needs aren't being met. They can show us where we've abandoned ourselves or what we might need to let go of. And so for most clients, their burnout is trying to show them those exact things. It's showing them where they're out of alignment with their true selves and their soul's purpose.
That's really beautiful. And I know it's something I've talked about before. I think sometimes we take a job because it's the most prestigious and the most money, and that was our goal until we
Mhm.
get there and realize we're just not very happy because our values might be independence or autonomy or spending more time with our family. And we're not getting that at that job. And yet we often feel stuck. And so we feel burned out, but it's because we're a square peg in a round hole, perhaps. One thing
Exactly.
I've heard you mention in some of the things you've written is the burnout origin story. What does that mean? What is that concept? And why is it important for me to understand my journey to help overcome burnout?
Sure. So I realized that my burnout actually started well before I even went to law school, back to childhood even, that this tendency to burn out was part of a much larger pattern in my overall life. And I see this with my clients in most cases. They also tend to have issues with codependency, with one-sided relationships, with always being the fixer or the rescuer. You
Mhm.
know, they're the planner in the friend group or the one that everyone leans on in a crisis. And so maybe they have trouble setting boundaries or with being a people pleaser. It seems like whatever they do, it tends to get out of balance, whether that's
Why were you just describing me in every one of those characteristics?
do you feel personally called out? Oh, I'm
I
describing
do. Except
myself.
you haven't mentioned perfectionism yet. That was going to be the next one, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm describing, my old self. And so everything will get out of balance, whether that's abusing a substance or even seemingly healthy things like extreme exercise regimens or restrictive diets. They also have trouble with receiving. That's a huge component of burnout because they're too busy giving and overextending themselves, but they're also shut off to any sort of replenishment coming back in. And so for me, part of my origin story was that I was raised in a high control religious group, a cult, until about the age of 10. And this church promoted harsh physical discipline of kids, like with using a paddle. And my dad was a rageaholic, so that was not a good combo.
No,
And
I'm so sorry you had that experience. That's really sad.
thank you. Thank you. And I was an only child and my parents divorced when I was 14, so I had to deal with a lot of that on my own and just a lot being very independent from a young age, but I learned that academic achievement was my safe place. It was my way out. And so I learned that by being successful and excelling academically, I could make my parents happy. I could get approval and validation. I could have a sense of control over my life. But you can see how this set the stage for my burnout later in life because my entire sense of self worth became tied to achievement and what I could do. And I'd say 90% of my clients, even if they came from the best family and had great parents, were able to trace their current burnout back to something from the childhood family dynamic. And they're able to see how it affects at least one other area of their life. It's never just career. But if we're never aware of that pattern and where it actually came from, then it's very difficult to break it.
You know, it's fascinating to me you say that because I've shared often here about how, and I had two wonderful parents, but I was bullied, I was heavy, I was geeky, I was smart, all these things that made me very unpopular. And I spent a large part of my life seeking approval and validation and compliments and commendations to make me feel better and to feel accepted. Same kind of thing for different reasons you went through. Is that a
Mhm.
common pattern among lawyers that some of those experiences are what lead us to a place where we're feeling burned out?
Absolutely. And I think everyone has their own unique story and
Yes.
challenges, certainly, but it could be anything from maybe you felt invisible in your family of origin through no one's fault. This isn't about blaming and shaming anyone's parents or being in a victim mentality, but it's recognizing that before about the age of 7, before your brain's limbic system is fully developed, you store and interpret information in a very different way, which means that a lot of people are walking around like as a wounded 6-year-old, and that's who's running the show.
Right.
That is who's making decisions and reacting. And so it's just a matter of tracing it back. When did this feeling first start? When was the first time I remember feeling this way? What's a match? How does this match up with the overall pattern in my life? And once we focus on that, we can go back to that, the origin, where it started, and address it there.
You know, I think many lawyers come across to me as being driven, highly competitive. Um, and for me, maybe that drive came from my need to prove something from my childhood. Sounds like that was the case for you. Is that your experience, that a lot of lawyers, a lot of people become lawyers because of those experiences, make them particularly driven and competitive and success oriented?
It's so interesting how we will tend to recreate our childhood emotional experiences because we want a different result and we want to get it right. And so, one reason that I'm so interested in the subconscious mind is that this really plays into how some people are drawn to high stress professions exactly for that reason, Gary, that the number one job of the subconscious is to keep us safe. And the subconscious interprets familiarity as safety, which means that even if something is very unpleasant or uncomfortable, you may have heard the expression, people will choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. In some cases, that high stress job is an exact match to the chronic state of stress or maybe hypervigilance that you grew up in, and or the need to prove yourself or be in control when everyone around you is out of control, whatever it is. It feels familiar, and therefore the subconscious says, yep, this is the right place for us. Like in my case, the fact I ended up in a profession where the stakes were very high, millions of dollars were at stake, potentially very high consequences, having to deal with a lot of stuff on my own, matched my childhood emotional experience exactly. It was like, I hate this, but I know I can do it because I've trained for this my whole life. But the good news is we can rewire this so that you can start relating to your job in a different way and really start making love-based decisions rather than fear-based decisions.
So I think you just explained how the subconscious mind can contribute to our burnout. How does EFT help to address that?
So I think this really goes hand in hand with the nervous system, and that's another um, component that has been overlooked. I know certainly for me, that was kind of the missing key in my own burnout recovery. So your subconscious mind is always working in the background. You're not even aware of it. It's like software or an app. It's running in the background. We're not even aware it's there, but it's affecting everything we do. And around 90% of our brain activity is subconscious rather than conscious. And in terms of the communications between our brain and body, about 80% is going from our body to our brain. Only about 20% is going from our brain to our body. And likewise, your autonomic nervous system is always working in the background, regulating your breathing and heart rate, things like that. And so the nervous system and our subconscious work together because our subconscious is constantly taking direction from our nervous system as far as what feels safe. And so our subconscious mind will let our nervous system know when something is perceived as a threat so we can have the correct physiological response like fight or flight. And the problem is our brains have not yet evolved enough to know the difference between a nasty email from opposing counsel and a tiger. So we walk around in a constant state of stress response, even though there's no actual physical danger, which is a state we were never meant to live in and ultimately contributes to burnout because we're constantly flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. What most of us try to do is exert all this energy to address that cognitive or conscious 10 to 20%. But when we flip it, we direct our energy to that 80 to 90% that lives in the body and in the subconscious. That's where we start seeing lasting change. It's like the ultimate shortcut to work smarter, not harder. And so when we're doing the EFT tapping, we're sending signals of safety directly to the nervous system and the subconscious mind, which then allows you to start responding and reacting differently without feeling that emotional charge anymore.
Hmm, that's amazing. What I know you've talked about a three-step process to help overcome burnout and to kind of regain some sense of balance and well-being. Tell me what that three-step process is and how it works.
Sure. So the first step is to take the edge off and get you out of that extremely stressed fight or flight reactive state, because it's just like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We can't heal and grow when we're in survival mode. So we want to get you out of that survival mode. Step two is to start working on those deep, real deeper underlying issues, the childhood stuff, the limiting beliefs, stored trauma, lack of alignment, whatever it is. Step three is where we can start to create what you do want. And this isn't necessarily always a linear process. You might reach step three in one area and then need to go back to step one for a completely different issue, or you might bounce between steps two and three. Step three was actually the inspiration for my free e-workbook, which is all about identifying your true life purpose, your mission, your values, and your priorities. So that's a tool for the self-reflection that I guide my clients through in that step three. But I wanted to make it available to everyone. So that's available on my website.
That's great. Well, we can include a link to it in the show notes or to your website so they can find that. And does that process with the clients you work with, does that help them to manage their burnout and to be healthier and happier?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're seeing phenomenal results. This is some of the most rewarding work I've ever done.
What self-care practices do you recommend for lawyers to help prevent burnout? And I know it's almost like, oh, self-care, are we going down that road again? That's what everybody talks about. What do you think is a good practice for lawyers who are listening to you today, who feel burned out, who feel overwhelmed, who haven't done
Mhm.
that deep dive that you mentioned? What do you recommend for them?
So obviously, I'm going to say EFT tapping, but there are a ton of free resources out there. Even if you choose not to work with a practitioner, I so encourage you to do that on your own. Make that a part of your daily routine, whether it's when you wake up or before you go to bed. Even if you're not burned out, it's a great preventative tool. It's also just great for peak performance. And just in general, though, I would say just to take exquisite care of yourself physically in terms of nutrition and sleep and exercise. It's really the simple things. Um, you wouldn't treat a minivan and a Ferrari the same way. And I know if you're listening to this, you're a Ferrari. And if you're going to be expected to perform at such a high level, then you need to be properly rested and nourished and clear-minded. And so sometimes the best self-care practice or daily habit is to say no to anything that's going to get in the way of that. And if you have trouble saying no, then, EFT can help with that too. Some of the fears that might be holding you back from standing up for yourself.
So looking ahead into the future, I've been practicing since 1978, and many people know I'm in recovery. I've seen the changes in how recovery is seen in society. It's seen more as a success instead of a failure. I've seen how stresses have built up in the legal profession in the 45 years I've been practicing. But looking ahead to the future, what do you envision the role of holistic wellness to be in the legal profession? And can a stodgy, staid profession really open itself up to new concepts that could really be helpful?
I dream of a world where we have EFT taught in every law school as a stress management technique, that instead of firm retreats that center around alcohol, that it becomes more normal to have things like group EFT and sound healing. I want to see lawyers use this technique to access their creativity and intuition and start getting amazing results for their clients in a fraction of the time. But, deeper than that, I really want lawyers to live their true purpose and to carry out their mission, whatever that is. And I want us to use our power and positions of influence for the highest and best good. And I want us to be healthy physically and emotionally. And, I'm just trying to do that one lawyer at a time and trusting that that ripple effect of the changes in each person will transform the legal industry. So I do think it's possible, even in a very typically corporate, conservative profession. I'm seeing that people are starving for genuine authenticity, um, this kind of deeper healing and deeper conversations around this. So it really all starts within us, each as individuals. We all have that responsibility.
Can you share any example without, of course, not mentioning a name of anyone you've seen, client of yours, a lawyer, maybe a skeptical lawyer like you were, who has utilized this technique and really achieved a level of serenity and peace that they didn't have before?
The first thing that came to mind was actually a recent law school graduate who was studying for the bar,
Yeah.
and they weren't doing so well on their practice tests, and their anxiety was just through the roof. So they hadn't even started practicing yet, but here they were approaching this milestone, and just the self-doubt and self-talk was really getting in their own way. And so seeing them improve their practice scores and then go into that exam completely confident and then pass, that's always great to hear back from them after they pass. Um, and that's kind of why I mentioned I would love to teach this technique to as many law students and new attorneys as possible, because I know if I had this technique in my tool belt, it would have saved me so much needless stress and suffering. Um, but yeah, with so many of my clients, we're really able to identify patterns in their lives that they aren't able to see. So I love that aha moment in a session where they become aware of that blind spot, and then they can go to work on it.
Yeah, I think self-awareness is such an important tool for our happiness, because often people are stressed and they don't take time to think about, why am I stressed? What's stressing me? What is going on about that? And only when we really understand it can we really address it. I had the pleasure too many times of having had acupuncture. I've never understood it. I think the practitioners may understand it, but maybe they want to keep it secret. I don't know. But I always ask, and I still don't understand it. But what I know is it has worked for me.
Mhm.
And I believe in the same way that this would work. And probably some of you out there are kind of raising your eyebrows and questioning, oh, really? But that's exactly where Tracy was, and was for 2 years until she found this worked. And there are too many of you out there who are suffering stress and burnout. And I would really urge you to reach out to Tracy and chat with her about what this is and see if it can really help you. Because what do you have to lose? To get in touch with yourself, be happier, healthier, more serene, more balanced. You deserve that. And I truly believe Tracy can help you.
Thank you, Gary.
Tracy, I call this podcast The Free Lawyer because it's all about how we can achieve personal freedom. And, it's funny, your life is kind of one of those, which I admire, because you've chosen your own course, and one that is very non-traditional. You still practice law some, but you've left the full-time practice of law to chase this dream of helping other lawyers be healthier and happier. But in your life, what does true personal freedom mean to you?
When I think of freedom, I think of sovereignty, or being self-governed, because it's not, freedom is not about doing whatever you want with no consequence. I think it's about choosing your own consequences so you can live in alignment with your core values. And, just like sobriety is freedom for you and so many others, it still requires a choice and it still requires discipline. But being self-governed, being truly free, to me means that nothing outside of us has power over us unless we choose to allow it. So no substance, no boss, no job can knock you off your foundation, or change the truth of who you are. And it's also the ability to walk away from things that are no longer serving you.
Well, I could not agree more. I think too often we allow things outside of us that we have no power over control
Mhm.
how we feel inside. And I
Yeah.
know, I was once complaining about how I felt, and someone said, look, if you're disturbed, the trouble lies within. That really made me angry. It's like, what the heck? This person did this, that, or the other thing to me. But then I realized it's so empowering because I can choose how I feel today. I can choose how to handle that in a way that is healthier for me. It may be setting a boundary. It may be ending a relationship. It may be choosing to respond to whatever, but to realize that I have power to make a choice where I don't have to be so frustrated and resentful.
Exactly.
Tracy, thank you so much for your time today. I think if I were listening to you and I was under that stress that so many of us feel, I'd want to reach out to you and learn more about what you do and how you can help. Where can those who are listening today find you, and how can they best get in touch with you?
So you can visit my website at tapoutburnout.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Tracy Inscore. I'm also on Instagram and YouTube as Tap Out Burnout. So please reach out. I'd love to hear from you and just chat.
Great. Tracy, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate everything you shared. You're really amazing at what you do, and I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Gary. I appreciate you.
And thank you all for joining us today for this really fascinating episode. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And as always, please be well, be safe, and be free. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Free Lawyer Podcast. Wherever you are listening, if you enjoyed what I shared, please leave me a rating and review. I would appreciate hearing more about what you like best and what topics you might like me to cover in future episodes. If you are interested in experiencing a more fulfilling and a more successful life, please contact me at www.GaryMiles.net, where you can schedule a free discovery call with me so I can learn more about you, your challenges, and your dreams. I appreciate each and every one of you, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks to all of you for your support.